Hello everyone, welcome to a new video of your Polyglot Academy. Today it's lesson 51 in our season How to Learn German up to B1 level in 1 month. And today we're going to talk about the passive. Now, what is the passive tense? Well, the passive voice is used when the focus is on the action being performed rather than on the subject performing the action. How does this work? Well, let's consider a normal sentence. Der Arzt untersucht den Patienten. Doctor examines the patient. So this is simply a normal sentence. And this is the active sentence, so a normal one. Let's convert it to a passive one. So the active would be der Arzt untersucht den Patienten, and the passive would be der Patient wird von dem Arzt untersucht. So instead of saying that the doctor examines the patient, we're saying that the patient is examined by the doctor. So we're simply converting it. Well, how does this conversion work? Well, let's first consider the subject of the passive sentence. Now, the object in the active sentence, so in this case, den Patienten, is going to become the subject in the passive sentence, so der Patient. And in this case, we can see that it's a direct object. So if we're going to have an accusative and dative and a genitive, then we always know that the accusative of the active sentence, in the case den Patienten, is going to become the subject of the passive sentence. Now let's talk about the verb. The verb untersucht is changed into the passive form by using the appropriate form of werden, depending on the tense, plus the Partizip 2 of the main verb, so the Partizip 2 of untersuchen, which is untersucht. And now let's consider the agent. The subject of the active sentence, der Arzt, is now introduced by von in the passive sentence, which means by, and remains in the dative case, so it becomes von dem Arzt. Now, how do you form the passive verb? So how do you form the verb? Well, in order to form, for example, the verb of a passive sentence from a presence in the active sentence, then it's going to become, the structure is going to be werden, so the verb werden conjugated to the present simple, depending on the person, and it's going to be followed by the Partizip 2 of the main verb, as we already talked about in this case. Wird untersucht. Now let's consider a second example. Der Junge isst einen Apfel. How would you convert this to the passive voice? I'll give you 2 seconds and then I'll give you the solution. Well, it's not that difficult. We simply have to think about how we did it in the first place. So, der Junge isst ein Apfel, the boy is eating an apple. It's going to become, ein Apfel wird von dem Jungen gegessen. An apple is eaten by a boy. How does this work? Well, the verb ist, which means is eating, is going to become is eaten or wird gegessen. And we talk about how to convert verbs in presence from the active sentence to a passive one. We're simply going to firstly conjugate werden to the present simple, and it's going to be followed by the Partizip 2 of the main verb, so the Partizip 2 of essen, which is gegessen. And now, as we can see, we're simply changing the subject with the object and the object with the subject. So the subject of the active sentence, der Junge, is going to become the object of the second one, von dem Jungen, and it's going to be in the dative case. And the object of the active sentence, so einen Apfel, it's the accusative object, is going to become the subject of the passive sentence. It's going to be ein Apfel. Now, we talked about how to form the passive form if we have a presence, but how does it work with other tenses? Well, we have 5 possibilities. If we talk about these 5 tenses, we're talking about the presence, Präteritum, the perfect, Plusquamperfekt, and future 1, or Futur 1. Now, how do we conjugate it? Well, you can see it from this table, and there are also some examples of an active sentence and a passive sentence. I would recommend you to make a screenshot of this table or to just write it down in your notes, because it's very important to remember. It is extremely important. Let's, for example, consider the Präteritum. Now, in order to form the passive form of an active sentence in the Präteritum, we're going to first use wurden conjugated, so the Präteritum of werden, plus the Partizip 2. And you can see it from the example. Mein Freund aß den Apfel is going to become der Apfel wurde von meinem Freund gegessen. So the verb is going to be wurde gegessen. Wurden conjugated to the third person singular, and then the Partizip 2 gegessen. This works for every tense. Let's consider the perfect. In order to conjugate the passive form of the perfect, we're first going to conjugate sein to the present simple. Then sein is going to be followed by the Partizip 2, and the Partizip 2 is simply going to be followed by worden. Simply worden. It's not to be conjugated or anything, it's simply worden. Let's consider the examples. Mein Freund hat den Apfel gegessen. It's going to become der Apfel ist, so sein conjugated, von meinem Freund, gegessen worden. So Partizip 2 gegessen, followed by worden. Let's consider the Plusquamperfekt. The passive form is very similar to the one we talked about for the perfect. We're first going to conjugate sein to the Präteritum, and it's going to be followed by the Partizip 2 and by worden. So for example, the active sentence, mein Freund hatte den Apfel gegessen, is going to become, der Apfel war von meinem Freund gegessen worden. So we have war, which is the Präteritum conjugated, gegessen worden. And now finally, let's consider the Futur 1. In order to conjugate the passive form, we're first going to conjugate werden to the present simple, and it's going to be followed by the Partizip 2 and by werden, simply werden. Let's go through the example. Mein Freund wird den Apfel essen. It's going to become, der Apfel wird, so werden conjugated, von meinem Freund gegessen werden. So gegessen is Partizip 2, and then we simply have werden. And you can see it also from the highlights I made right here. So the black highlights the verbs. Präsens ist, wird gegessen, aß, wurde gegessen, hat gegessen, ist gegessen worden, etc. Now, this wasn't an easy lesson, so I would recommend you to watch it again, or maybe to try to make more examples in your own mind with the help of the table. But other than that, if you understood everything without any problems, try to do these exercises. Convert the following active sentences to the passive voice and write in the comments your answers so that I can correct them, so that you can get a direct feedback from me. And please pay attention to the tenses, because the tenses are very important. And as we already talked about this, depending on the tense, we're going to get a different passive voice. So this is fundamental to understand. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the lesson and hope you learned something new. And I wish you a nice day. See you next time.